Welcome to another episode of Oops, I'm in a Cult. I'm Scott Barker.
And I'm Charity Novelisi.
We're going to talk a little bit about what signs you might be in a cult and how you deal with it afterwards. Well, at least how we deal with it afterwards. I don't know what you're doing.
A little personal something, like our process in getting out of the cult and how we've worked to recover ever since. And we hope it helps you.
Yeah.
Welcome to the whatever fucking podcast this is.
You don't want to mention that it's the Living Word
No,
Fellowship?
I think that's great, but is it just going to be called the Living Word Cult Podcast?
No.
Oh, what could it be? Charity? You and I are both former members, Living Word Fellowship.
We're investigating the ins and outs of our experience.
In and Out Podcast.
You can cut that part out. It's real casual.
It guaranteed is going to break down very quickly, which is totally fine. It's the Living Word Fellowship. It's the walk.
Thought it was a church, turned out it was a cult. Oh, there's a good...
That's what it is.
I mean, I kind of love it.
It's not bad.
It's not bad. Oops, I'm in a cult.
What are we doing? Are we just coming in here? Is this a Sunday morning?
Sunday morning, without a warning. So much better than church.
Oh my God. But let's not draw that parallel at all. That's not what's happening.
But don't you think about that sometimes? You're like on a Sunday morning, it's like 9:00 and you're just at home having a nice cup of coffee, sitting in your sunny living room, and you're like, God damn, I'm glad I'm not at Church of the Living Word in a 3-hour marathon service, after which I'm going to feel like absolute shit about myself.
Yes. I've been out for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And I still, has it been 20 years? I mean, no, okay. Really, it's like 10 years.
It's like, I get it. I get it.
I've been out for like over 10 years, and I still get excited that I have Sunday morning to myself and I don't have to go run the audio at Church of the Living Word.
Yeah.
And this time of year, it's fall.
Ooh, it's feast season.
It's feast season, and I don't have to Friday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday, all freaking day, have to do anything with that. So, yeah.
Because our services weren't like just, you go for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. No, it was like a whole day kind of event.
It was a whole day kind of event, and it was intense. Yeah, and even in between services, or if you didn't have services, there were the social things and whatever. And then being a part of the audio booth, that didn't really mean socializing and playtime. It meant you're there to run the board or do some run around with a microphone to like record Gary and Marilyn.
Same for me in like my servant capacities. It was like, you got to go prep this and do that, and like no fun for you. That's right.
Yeah. And you learn to have fun through working. Like that was something that I learned, I think, in that thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. Like don't at me.
We made
but like,
do with what
it was like you find your ways to like, this works for me. If I enjoy myself doing this thing while I have to like do this thing I don't want to do.
I totally get it.
Anyways, sign number 1 that you are in a cult. Is you have services every single day and you dedicate your entire life to
or you're rejected. Oh man.
So what is this episode? What are we doing here?
I'm excited about this episode because we're going to talk about, first of all, warning signs that you're in a potentially unsafe group in a potentially unsafe group. It also applies to relationships. But, and then kind of our process and how we started realizing that we were in an unsafe group. And then really important to me, I know to you as well, to talk about like how we have worked. I wanted to say recovered, but we're recovering, how we've started that journey and what the things that we've done to help ourselves in this process.
Yeah. I think you and I talk about this all the time. And it's really good to talk about it. But I think it's really interesting too, because our whole community is going through this. Some people are on different points on that road because of their, they left earlier or they were kicked out or just whatever. And they've had to find ways to heal. But there was that big event in 2018 where like suddenly, whether you liked it or not, whether you wanted to be out of the cult or not, you were now out of what is being labeled a cult. it wasn't up to you. And so there's a lot of catch up. I think a lot of people are having to do this sudden trauma of like realizing like, oh my God, this like being slapped in the face with this thing.
For those that hadn't left yet, it was just like, there was ours was like a slow roll into realizing, oh, I'm in a cult and I want out. Theirs was just like all of a sudden. Yeah.
And they're different experiences of kind of the same, it's kind of the same thing. And there are a million different ways to process that and to move on from it and or take what you've learned and turn your life into something. But like I think that is part of it. Like the common denominator with all of this is like, hello and welcome to your new life that you didn't expect to have. That doesn't have the living word in it, except for when you listen to our podcast or if you hang out in this room.
But filled with living word literature and tapes.
So we wanted to start, I think, with a little bit of this familiar thing. If everybody is interested in cults, you've probably looked up a list similar to this, these warning signs that you're a part of a cult or that a certain group and the behaviors of that group are categorized as like a destructive cult. But we wanted to do it from the perspective of like us who are part of a cult and like what we would have seen, could have seen, did see while we were in it, when we got out of it, and then what to do and where you take that after and during. And like, it's like so much of this stuff, like one of the things that just like really sticks with me that I think I've mentioned probably a few times, and we've talked about a few times, is just that like you can be slapped in the face with this stuff when you're in the cult, but ignore it completely or reject it. It doesn't matter like, that you see it. And I think a little bit of that conversation is like, how do you open yourself up to seeing it? What is that, like?
It is weird because like, I think I talked about this in my first interview with you, was that like, I read this list years before, maybe it was like 4 years before I actually left the cult. Yeah, I think it was exactly 4 years. Just reading it and being like, oh my God, yeah, the Living Word Fellowship ticks all of these boxes. And I still wasn't ready to accept it, or I didn't know how. I was really scared like to look at that truth. So I read it, I acknowledged that it was true, and then just like
and then kept going. But
it also was part of it was I didn't have anyone to validate me. I didn't, and that's the thing is you're raised to think that this is like is a calling. This is not just a membership in a church.
And I think there's even like more to it on like a personal level there where you're okay, so you have all the evidence you need that this is a cult. That doesn't suddenly mean that you're going to leave, because if you do, then you're leaving the only thing that you know, and the only safe place that you have, the safest place you have is the cult.
Yeah.
You'd be out on your own. I think even without reading a list like this, if you're being treated poorly, you already know you're being treated poorly. And that's really all the evidence that you need. But you're still not going to go because where would you go? What does that mean? Like, I think bad relationships are like that. Yeah. I think cults, obviously, and communities that you're just like, that are toxic, like are all like that. It's like, you don't need a list. You don't need somebody to come up to me and like, hey, you're in a cult. Already.
Yeah.
But like, what am I going to do about it is, I think, probably the hardest thing. And so that's, I think maybe we should read through these and just kind of like talk about what we saw while we were in it. This one's so easy. The first time.
And this is from Rick Ross, who's an expert on cults. He's the one that started the Cult Education Forum, which we've talked about before.
Yes, yeah. So right. We should. But this is Rick Ross's list of 10 warning signs of a potential unsafe group/leader. He also has 10 warning signs regarding people who are involved with a potentially unsafe group or leader. And that's like for you to look at your friends and be like, oh man, they sure like Apple products a lot.
The Apple cult.
Yeah, exactly. 10 signs
you can make a cult out of anything, really.
You sure can. 10 signs of a safe and group leader, which is an interesting. So he has a whole list of this thing. He's a cult expert that is a consultant and has helped people be deprogrammed and all sorts of things. But he also, like Charity said, made this website that is a collection of a lot of different cults and has forums where people can go and write about their experiences and things that they think maybe are cults, and it just kind of puts everything on the open. And it is where a lot of the stories of the living word being a cult came out, where most people who left first went to validate their experiences. And there's like a million pages of forums.
So it's 20
like
years,
so long.
a 20-year long thread, and just, like maybe like 2,000 entries or pages.
Could be more than that. I don't
lot.
know. It's like, it's super long, and there's a lot of stuff there. So anyways, we're just going to go through these 10 warning signs really quick. The first one, and we'll link to it in all the notes, all the show notes, and all the YouTubes and all the stuff like that. Absolute authoritarianism without meaningful accountability. Easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I've said that. What's that? The line that like sums it up for me is the
gift
and the calling is without repentance, like without accountability, you might as well say.
Mm-hmm.
No tolerance for questions or critical inquiry. No meaningful stop me if you've got a memory. No meaningful financial disclosure regarding budget expenses, such as an independent audited financial statement. I could go on about this one, but what?
Well, I was just thinking about a recent conversation with a former staff member at Shiloh who had a lot of integrity with finances and tried to push back on some of the things that he questioned and felt were unethical, such as being asked to sign a blank check because Gary and Marilyn wanted it.
Even the accountant doesn't have a meaningful financial disclosure, like independently audit. Like even the accountant can't speak back against the finances.
Well, and he pushed back a lot, and then got sacked for it.
I can't.
So don't ask questions.
Yeah, I would just argue. This is something that this is my opinion, and I'll take whatever heat I get from it. But like, no meaningful financial disclosure regarding budget is every religious organization in America.
That's very true.
There is no meaningful financial disclosure regarding budget. That is up to, and you could argue maybe the safest versions of churches and different religious organizations is that there's a board that discusses the financial stuff, but it does stay in there. There is zero requirement for religious organizations to publish their finances in any way. They do not even have to file taxes. Not that they don't have to pay taxes like any other 501c3. They do not have to file taxes. So there's just no record anywhere. Anyways.
A lot of room for
at least of what it does is it opens the door for cults to be like, heck yeah.
Well, religion, and in our cult, it's like, I remember all the bars that were in the LA church, and then all of the liquor that was stocked there. Who was paying for that? Tithe money.
All of us.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
But then they
Rain
still
Street.
At Rain Street, and then they would still want you to pay for your drinks, and it's like, bro, well, I was never a good tither. Let me be honest.
I was a really good tither for the few years that I made money and was in the cult. And your mom, I think, covered your portion too. It sounds like so.
Refund, please. Hargrave Ministries.
There's no legitimate reason to leave. Former followers are always wrong in leaving, negative or evil or Nephilim. That one's easy. I mean, there just wasn't. Either you were set out or you blew out. Mm-hmm. That's it. Former members often relate the same stories of abuse and reflect similar pattern of grievances. Again, check that 20-year page on Rick Ross.
Very obvious.
Yes, very obvious. There are records, books, news articles, television programs, podcasts that document the abuse of the group leader. Yeah.
Let's go. There's the Vainglory Tony Cox documentary, which is kind of old. That's
1980.
1980.
Yeah. And the Spiritual Counterfeits Project document that floats around out there. Plus, there were a bunch of news articles that were around during John Robert Stevens' times. And I think the fact that there wasn't very much, especially during the Gary and Marilyn time, that was calling the place a cult, kind of makes you think, oh, well, see, there's not a lot. It changed. Maybe, they thought it was a cult when it was John, but then we cleaned up our act and we got which we did not. I mean, obviously Gary and Marilyn and Rick and all that stuff. But I do have records too of them hiring PR firms to go through the internet and clean everything up so that top results, anytime you search The Walk, John Robert Stevens, or The Living Word, it would always be their websites. They changed Wikipedia articles according to what they wanted the world to see. They would go in and edit it, all sorts of stuff like that. So the fact that there wasn't stuff out there for you to find was by design.
Yeah.
They worked hard at that. Followers feel they can never be good enough. I mean, Charity, this is yours.
This is just like, well, it's all of us, man. Like that's something that the theme that comes up again and again and again is I have to say, especially for those of us that were born and raised in it, we all struggle with that. But I don't want to discount the boomers and all that too. Like they deal with it too.
The group leader is always right. Yeah. Well, the doy. I feel like that's a repeat of like number one in some ways. The group leader is the exclusive means of knowing the truth or receiving the validation. No other process of discovery is really acceptable or credible. That's the word.
And how many times did we hear from the pulpit, Gary, be like, let me tell you how to think about this.
Yes.
Let me tell you how to think about this.
That was a common phrase. Let me tell you how to think about this. Or, well, how do we think about it? Well, I'll tell you how to think about it. Yeah. That was all in there. So you know all of this, you hear all of this, you see that like your organization checks all these boxes as, you know, like you even said, you looked that up, but that doesn't mean you're getting out. Mm-hmm. We see stuff come out like Shalom's letters, and a lot of people are kind of almost forced out. I mean, some people double down. We have like that little remnant left.
Yeah.
But
them.
Yeah.
Oh, we're just hundreds of people out here just fucking
hanging on to threads.
They just don't think that any of this matters. Any of the things that we've said.
I think let's take that same thinking of you. You know, like, okay, so Shalom's letters and the outpouring that came after it is undeniable. Mm-hmm. But like this list is undeniable, and you didn't.
That's
shake
true.
it. You stuck around. So maybe there's a little bit of that same thing.
There probably is. And I really struggle to find compassion, but we had a conversation about this yesterday where I kind of went, oh, like that. I can see that now. I can see why it's just too painful for some of these people to let this go, because then it's like, oh, I wasted my whole life on a lie. Mm-hmm. And then how do you even begin to process that? So I'm working towards having compassion, but it just feels like the bigger sentiment that I have is it's just so hurtful and infuriating that these people are out there like still supporting and promoting and believing these people that were so destructive and abusive.
Yeah, and a big part of that perspective is the truth and the calling is without repentance. It's not just something that was preached down, but it was thought up. It's that like you've heard this word, that word changed your life. John Robert Stevens laid hands on you and said something that changed your life. You joined this group and suddenly you had purpose, whatever. All of that stands outside of these people, at least in your mind. Like, so when we go through and we give you stories, when you read stuff online, when you're revisiting this stuff and you're like, look, obviously this person's bad. Like they lied, they cheated, they stole, they like, are you a sex monger? Are you like all of these things, it doesn't matter. Because it doesn't change. It's the same thing that like Gary says, it doesn't change the word that was brought. It doesn't change that thing that you felt, that moment that changed your life. And I think for a lot of people that came into this thing when John was at his height and in that 70s, whatever time period, it's really hard to let go of that because it defined your life. Mm-hmm. And I think, and this is me, and I was young when I started to get away from this, but I was born into this thing. It's all that the world was.
Yeah.
There was no choice for me. And I'm not saying that the choice was stripped from me. I'm saying put yourself in the shoes of the kids where it's like, we didn't know an alternative. You knew an alternative and you chose John, and that defined your life. But then you should know that you can go and there's an alternative out there, and it's actually fine. Charity and I and us that were born into this thing, born into this thing, we didn't know anything else.
Mm-hmm. How do you have perspective?
How do you have perspective on that? And I'm not trying to like shame anybody for like, we have it worse or whatever. The point is we learned how to cut off this thing that we decided was bad and hurting us, and felt it is better to be without and in the unknown than to be with this thing that has caused so much harm, not just to us, but to so many other people.
Yeah.
And I think that we feel 1,000 times stronger, so free for like getting rid of this.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it over and over. And like, I've gotten to a point in my life where it's like, no matter who I hold, and maybe almost too far of a degree, you know, we can see how that all plays out. But like anybody that is, I like, oh my God, I love this celebrity, like so great. Like in this thing, they said this one thing, it really like touched my heart. I find out that celebrity, you know, has been like scamming people for decades. I'll be like, oh, fuck that guy. I don't care. Like at this point, like it's like you show who you are. I get new information. My opinion changes because I have new information, and I'm not afraid to throw away something in part because I've learned not to make somebody else my personality, something else my personality. There is nothing, and this is again where I think a lot of people will probably, but you know, you take your path, and I think you can help balance me out a little bit here. There is nothing above me. I believe in causes, and I think that like we should care about each other and like those kind of things, but I will never sacrifice myself for somebody else's idea.
Right.
And I think that has been a long road, and even in like personal relationships is something I'm still learning and having to be challenged with. And
to not self-sacrifice.
Self-abandon. Self-abandon. All of that stuff is where it's like, oh, forget about me. Like, I want to help you. I think a lot of us are conditioned to do that, but there is so much strength and freedom from the strength that comes from letting go of something that isn't working anymore and looking for that like thing that's like, how can I grow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really intimidating. I think that's the thing, is you've spent your whole life with someone telling you that the only way to live is by submitting your life, your desires, turning your will over to another person, to what they called Christ in the flesh. And you have like almost an incapacity for making decisions on your own. And like, it's terrifying. You think, oh my God, now I've chosen to leave this group. I have nobody to answer to, but I don't have good decision-making skills because I wasn't allowed to.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're relearning all of these things. You're having to find new relationships. You're struggling with those embedded beliefs that like, oh, I've chosen something less. Or, I mean, because I still sometimes notice that I have these little like subtle undercurrent thoughts of like, oh, something bad is going to happen to me, or if life is just happening because everyone struggles in life. So it's like, oh, but I'm being punished because I spoke out against the church, and I know it's bullshit, but they fed that to us all our lives, so it's kind of grooved into your brain.
Yeah, it's kind of that thing that we've heard other people say in different ways. It's just because you're out of the cult doesn't mean it doesn't rule your life still. It's not still a part of you. I think Alina said it in a conversation I had with her where she was like, you can take the girl out of the cult, but you can't take the cult out of the girl. And like, that's definitely a truth that like you experience, like just because you left doesn't mean like suddenly you're behaving differently.
Right.
Suddenly you believe different things. It's an effort to like separate those things that they taught you, those things that were imposed on you, from the things that you truly believe. Right.
Which you kind of have to throw. Well, for me, I had to just throw everything out, which wasn't in one day that I was like, oh, I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't believe in the Bible. No, none of it. That was a long process for me of just going, like sitting myself down and asking, what do I really feel? Like, what do I believe? Just even objectively looking, like reading the Bible and seeing how Christianity at large uses it and going, you know what? That's not my heart. That doesn't look like love to me. So I don't want it. But that comes in stages.
It does come in stages. And it's a very like, I think a lot of people get to it in different ways. And I find it really fascinating, especially after Shalom's letters were released. And it was one of the questions I was asking, like I asked you at the end of our first conversation, and I asked a few other people on just those YouTube videos, like, what do you believe?
Mm-hmm.
And I find it really fascinating because it speaks volumes, not so much to like what people believe, but just how much no one actually believed the Living Word's teachings that was like imposed on us. And we're like, you're set free from it. And suddenly everybody's off in these different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And just other people, like outside of like official conversations, seeing people talking to them, like people are running off to different belief systems. And I'm sure you can analyze like why, but that doesn't matter. What I'm seeing very quickly is that like, we're not like, even though we all were supposed to believe this one thing, once we were set free, we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
We believed whatever we wanted, and we all found our own path to,
which is a beautiful thing. Like
Yeah.
everyone should do that. And there's no one way to
Mhm.
do this.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to talk about the process of you know, how I said I read this and it was these 10 warning signs and was like, yep. But then it was still 4 years before I left because one, no one to validate and be, you know, like talking. Even my mom, we've struggled with this in, you know, post fact that like, why didn't you? Because she left before I did. And I was like, didn't you? I was like begging for someone to be like, yes, Charity, you should leave. But there's that whole thing of like, well, if I confirm to Charity that yes, like this is a unsafe group, then if she changes her mind, then I'm going to lose her.
And that's a very real.
It is.
That's like we could talk about that a little bit. Like I have always thought about, I think about that with people that I think believe unsafe things, whether they're like cult-like or not. When they believe them very like at their core, or it's a reaction to some feeling that they have, you can't come at it like head on.
Yeah.
And say you're in a cult, because they will shut you out.
Yes, there's that danger.
Yeah. And we had in the Living Word, we had a system for doing that. It wasn't just the individual making that choice and the brainwashing cutting you out. That did happen. But it was also like, if I were to say to you, Charity, you're in a cult, and you mentioned it to your designated relationship, they'd be like, you probably shouldn't talk to that person anymore.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there were varying degrees of it, because if someone left, you know, quietly without making a stink, without talking shit about the church, you could hang out with them, but you'd be discouraged from it. I was told by one of the leaders, because I was still spending time with this couple that had left the church, and they were like, well, just be careful because of transference. And I was like, okay. Transference, it's like, it's contagious, this desire to leave this group.
Yeah.
And just hang out with so-and-so, this other couple who was like, super dedicated, you know, to balance it out. And I was like, the fuck are you talking about? This was when I was really close to leaving. Actually, I'd already wanted to, but I was just like waiting for some things to fall into place. But the process started for me like 10 years. Didn't I say 10 years? I'm trying to count back. Almost. Maybe more like 7 years.
7 years from when?
From the time that I started, things started stirring inside me. Like, I don't know about this. No, I guess it was 10 years, because it was around 2007 when I first started reading the forums.
Yeah, it's that time you have to like process it within yourself.
Yeah.
Before, like, it's like the only safe place is like the deepest, darkest crevices of your mind that like.
And if you're only associating with other cult members, who do you have to even bounce things off of? Everyone's going to agree with like the doctrine pretty much. Or if they don't, they're even afraid to tell you like, hey,
you need that you need to be able to voice that stuff.
Yeah.
And when you're in it, like that was something I didn't even consider. Like, before I ever would have considered questioning the church, somebody said to me or asked me, do you have any friends or do you know anybody who's not a part of the church? And I like, no, I don't. I didn't know, because I was going to the church school, and then that was it. That was my life. Church, school, church.
Yeah.
What else is there? And so there was never that, why would I, that's how they keep you in that, in that bubble. So there's no ever thought of like questioning anything. You're in like a similar situation, but then you end up you get to move away, but you're still like mentally held in.
Exactly. I mean, and I don't know why I've always had associated with people outside of the church, always. And, but yeah, it wasn't until I still had friends outside of the church when I first moved away from the church. And, but I never talked about these things, never, because I was still too indoctrinated.
Right.
And it was just, like I said, an internal processing of very subtle feelings of like, oh, I don't know. I feel a little better not being so involved with the group, and kind of like maybe not as depressed.
You started recognizing that like even just the physical space away from it and getting your time back. Being
out from under that pressure of like, God, just you are constantly required to be there and participate and blah, blah.
But what you're going to say about your friend that you end up, to tell that story, you're walking on the beach with a friend.
Oh, yes.
And you're just like, yeah.
Yeah. She was studying to be a holistic mental health counselor. And so she was my yoga teacher trainer. And so she was like.
A bunch of woo-woo stuff.
A bunch of woo. Charity loves the woo-woo. Scott loves to tease me about it. So she was like offering, because she was still studying and like getting ready to graduate, offered to give me like counseling sessions for really cheap. And I remember just saying something to her. It was the first time I had talked honestly to like any kind of mental health care provider about these things. And the one thing that stood out to me that she said, well, when I told her, I said something about Marilyn telling me like to keep my spirit in my shoes. I was like, that's the kind of things that they would say. And she just whipped her head around, like looked at me and was like, the fuck? Like, she goes, that's awful. And I was like, well, that's the least of it. Like, let me tell you, but her reaction sparked something in me that was just like, oh, this is, to her, this sounds really fucking weird. She said, you're such a bright, shining person. Like, why would someone tell you to squash that down?
Yeah. And that's the like, how easy it is. Tell somebody from outside of grab a stranger on the street, shake them and be like, my church leader told me this. They'll be like, get the fuck away from me, you weirdo. Like it's, they validate you just by like hearing. It's like we had our conversation. I'm pretty sure this will come out after Bo's conversation. We had our conversation with Bo, who was in out, not really a part of it. And they see it right away.
Yeah.
And sometimes all it takes is like you sitting there talking with somebody you trust, you like independently make this connection with, and you're like, oh, I trust you. And they've never said anything about the church, but like once they build your trust and then they just say that one thing, like questioning Marilyn, that's really what's happening.
It planted a seed.
It's that she like dared to speak against Marilyn. No one would do that in the church. Even if they thought the advice was bad, they'd be like, well, Marilyn said it.
Marilyn said it. She's the lamp of Israel.
Yeah. And that was like that's a memory that's floating around my brain, is the first time somebody questioned Gary and Marilyn and just spoke as if there was something worth doubting there. That I was like, oh, you can do that? Like that's, I didn't start doubting. I didn't immediately get out, but
it planted
it planted that seed of like, well, that she didn't die after she asked that question,
Right.
like,
yeah. It's, the seed is planted. And then if you really choose to, even little by little, start watering that and like feeding these other ideas, you start to open, like things start to open. And I just started to become more observant. Like, oh, when I go down to LA for these feast services, I always feel like shit. When I go back home to Monterey, like I feel better. And I'm around like these other people that aren't a part of the church. I just started noticing things. Yeah. And that was when I really wanted to leave, but couldn't for certain reasons. And then I had a lot of then people planting seeds of doubt in me too. Like, oh no, like I think it's changed and, you should give it another chance. It's not as toxic as it used to be. And I was like, okay, I'll give it one more round, moving to Hawaii. And like, boy, was that a shit show.
That's where I was going back into the church and like
deep in and getting involved
in it. And like your journey out is like in and out. It's and I think a lot of people that, you kind of were a quiet exit.
Oh yeah.
Compared to the kickouts and the blowouts.
I did the old Irish goodbye.
Yeah, I was a quiet exit too, where it's just like, I'll go to, the last few things that I did was like the Christmas truck and like helping with that, or just going to, I think one of the big things, I was asked to video it and I was like, no. And now, but I'll go.
That had to feel good to just say no, because you could.
Exactly. And it's just like, there's a lot of like that slowly kind of like make it safe, try not to upset anybody, which is fine. Like get out however you can from these kind of things. And I think like toxic relationships are kind of the same way. It's like that, like, how do you sneak out? Because if you try and the controlling person in those will try and stop you.
Oh yeah.
And if you try and like make any kind of note about it. Yeah.
I just had this memory and I think I've told you about this, but it is that they knew, the leaders in Honolulu, they knew that I was like, as he put it, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And I was like, yeah, absolutely I am. And we were having this discussion one time about, it was my ex-husband and I, like where, because he was in the military and like talking about where we would end up, like what. And I said, well, I don't feel like we need to live near a church. And the female leader just was like so offended by that. And you know what she said to me? She goes, well, if he doesn't have the anchor of the military or the anchor of this church, I don't know. You don't have any kids together. He might decide he doesn't love you anymore and leave you one day. And I was like, what in the fuck? Threatening, like if you leave the church, your husband is going to want to leave you. And it's like,
yeah, I mean, that's the line in every creative way that they can possibly think of in those moments. It's repercussion if you leave us. Some bad thing is going to happen if you leave, like you'll lose your covering. So who knows? It's anything, and it comes out in different ways. So like that's the kind of thing that we've talked about before with like some of these people that are controlling like that. They're so well practiced at it that like in that instant, she can immediately come up with a scenario to where like your life's going to be terrible if you leave, and just like throw out an example that you just made up on the spot for no reason,
Yeah. And it's so cruel too. Yes, and the thing that was the most cruel about it to me was she threw in that you don't have kids together because she knew I couldn't have kids.
Just however she could wound you.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like, no, like my ex and I aren't together anymore, but it's not for any like reason like she said. We love each other deeply. We're still good friends. But it's like that whole, I still think about like wondering if she's heard that we're not together anymore and be like, oh, I knew it. So
and this is, like, and that's part of the like the thinking of all this stuff is like, there's a little bit of control that they still have over you.
It's so true. And it really bothers me. It really bothers me because for a while I really cared what other people thought. And then I was like, you know what? None of those people matter.
Yeah.
We know the truth. We know what's really gone on here. But it was, that was one of those moments where I was like, if this is the kind of shit that I have to put up with to be a part of this organization, that kind of cruelty, no.
Yeah.
And it was just like prior to that it was the year prior to that incident where I was like really trying to give it another chance because I thought, maybe people are right. Maybe this is getting better. And like the leaders there initially, because they knew I was sort of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, they were being really nice to me and like trying to draw me in, and the whole love bombing thing. As soon as I started to get reinvested, like the abuse started. Just like always. But I was still feeling super conflicted. And then I went to this advanced yoga teacher training. I went to get my higher certification, and it was this month-long thing in Indonesia. So hippie. I went to Bali to do my yoga teacher training. Doesn't get more woo-woo than that, does it? And the guy, like the guy was a real asshole, but the teacher. But he said one thing, and I wrote it down in my journal. The one journal that I've kept of all of the journals I've had over the years, I told you, is the one that I kept for like the 2 years preceding me leaving the church, because it was like all the mental processes and emotional processes that I went through in making my way to this point of like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And a pivotal moment for me was this guy, this douche, but I will thank him forever for saying this. He's like, if you're a part of a community that won't let you be who you are or makes you feel bad for being who you are and doesn't accept you for who you are, you're not in the right place. And I just remember I started crying, and I wrote it down in my journal that night, because that was that moment I knew I was like, I have to leave. I have to get out. I'm going to lose people that I love. People are going to talk shit about me, but I have to, or I'm never going to be okay. I'm never going to be able to be who I really am.
What's amazing to me is and we could say this 1,000 different ways, is the journey that it takes you to hear that thing. I mean, how many times did somebody probably say something similar to you? Did you read that in a book or a magazine or something that like said something
probably
like that, like honor yourself, like, or something, along those lines. But it takes these, like, you have to have these personal experiences. You have to build your own strength.
Yeah.
You have to have people out there that like say something or are just supportive in like a non-confrontational way. And I think, I don't know if anybody like cares about this kind of stuff, but like, I think when you left a cult, you do start caring about the people that are around you that you think are maybe in a cult, or you start recognizing cult-like behavior in all sorts of different things. And you want to be like, hey, you're in a cult, stop, and it's like, it really is the, part of the like, oops, I'm in a cult is like, oops, I'm in a cult. You have to realize it.
Yeah.
No one can tell you, you can, if you want to be there for the person or that you care about, you think is in a cult, then you just have to be there.
Yeah.
You don't have to take their abuse 100%. You don't have to do that. But if they're deep in it, trying to confront them is just going to scare them into the cult. It's like a little gopher coming out of a hole,
point, right?
Like they're going to disappear, and they're going to have a whole support network in that cult that is going to validate their fear of you and your honesty. And so you have to show up like just as a friend that's there for them as a person. And like when they come to you, you'll eventually hear that thing where they talk about how the leader is treating them unfairly, and they'll be really careful about even saying that. And that'll be like probably a good sign that that person is on their way out, and you can just be like, I'm here for you no matter what. And that's like, you always have a place to land if you are stuck, if you're trying to get out of that, something easy medicine to take down, because if you come at them hard, they'll run away, because everybody has to go on that journey themselves and get to that point where you can hear it, just like you at your fucking Indonesian yoga
training.
But yeah.
It was such a moment. It really was. And I think it was because I was really tired of just hating myself. I was really tired of like feeling that I had to twist myself into these shapes and this personality or whatever to be accepted by this group. And I just wanted to be free. Like I wanted to even just experience moving through the world without feeling like a piece of shit, and someone always there to remind me that I'm a piece of shit and I'm never good enough. I know a lot of us just really battle that still. I still do. And that's the thing, like we wanted to mention in this episode is like, this is an ongoing journey. This is like it's a long process to recover from this kind of a mental and emotional abuse. Yeah.
I want to point out like Titus, when we talked to Titus, that one like really struck me, because I think it's like an extreme version of what a lot of us feel like when you're out. It's the take the girl out of the cult out of her. But Titus's was like, he was kicked out and he still thought the cult was like the thing, because that was just so deeply embedded in him. And even those of us that are like, we talked to Lenny, who's like 180 almost instantaneously. There's still like a lot of processing that has to happen. And I think the online forums and the Facebooks and the different communities, the places that you can go, like all of that stuff is helping because it's like validating the experiences. And you have to go back and like revisit and like point out every time that you're like, oh, that's what this happened. And this is what was really happening. And just like acknowledging the reality of things, because like when you're living through it, like you're not allowed to acknowledge that stuff. And so here today, what do we do? And it's easy to be like, well, just go to therapy. Bye. End of story.
If only it were that simple.
Yeah, if only it were that simple. But
it's a start.
It's a start, and there's a lot of different paths for a lot of different people. But I think, was there? It sounds like you almost immediately went into the attempt at healing.
I started before I left the cult. I started because I knew I was preparing myself. It was not conscious really, but I remember my therapist at one point was still in Honolulu, and she said to me finally, like, well, you're in a cult. And I was like, yeah, I know. And I was ready to hear it. Mm-hmm. And that was like a turning point too, I would say. It was like, oh, someone said it out loud and I didn't flinch.
And that's the talent of or just a real risky gamble by your therapist, but like it's probably the talent of the therapist to recognize that you were ready to hear it.
Yeah.
And like maybe she just like kind of gave you that permission by saying it.
Yes.
To like kind of, but it was there on the tip of your tongue. Like if you said yeah right after it, then that's a good thing. Because that's, like I said, that's dangerous. Like you can, if somebody's deep in it and you say they're in a cult, they're like, okay, cool. Thank you for the session. Toodaloo.
Yeah. See you never.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had an easy out too, because it was like we were moving to Seattle. And that's why I joke about, I did the old Irish goodbyes. Like, I'm not telling anyone I'm leaving the church. Just, like I'm never coming back. I knew when I left that island, moved to Seattle, I would never be a part of the church again. And like you said, it's not this magical moment where you're like, I'm free, I'm free. You're just, and everything's like sunshine and rainbows. It was
well, you were in Seattle. You literally left sunshine and rainbows for the rain.
To the rain. That was the best year of my life, though, up until that point. Because I finally is like, sure, I had lived away from a church before, but this was like, I moved away from a church and I was not a part of it at all. Mm-hmm. What was surprising is the guilt that I felt. Like I remember, because I did have a soft spot for like the male leader in Honolulu, because I knew him before he became indoctrinated into the cult. He was like this really cool, like liberal, nice person, and he fell under the influence. But I still had like a love for him, and I felt. I mean, even though he was abusive to me at times too, but I still felt this guilt, like. You love these people even though they've done you wrong. Mm-hmm. So I was really working through a lot of that, but then I did start moving more into like therapy, but it just became more and more obvious that there was so much to unpack. It wasn't as simple as just going to talk therapy and like, oh, well, yeah, I was in a cult and now this. It was all these things that I couldn't I just still didn't even know all these layers that were there. I didn't know. And I didn't see it completely until after Shalom's letters, when that whole thing happened and I felt so empowered. And then it was like, oh my God, we did it. This thing is no longer a threat. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead. I'm going to go like live my life now.
You're talking about that high after.
The high.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Keep going.
Well, it didn't last long, because once the high wore off, it was like all that nuclear wasteland that had been living underneath. It was something that happened in my life that I won't even go into, but it was just kind of like a triggering event where all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, there's so much trauma that I have not addressed, didn't even know was there, just thought like, oh, this is just how I am. Mm-hmm. I'm like, struggle with depression, anxiety. Like so that I had been diagnosed with PTSD. So I had like a working knowledge of these things were going on, but it was something about this thing that happened in my life where just the floodgates open and I was a fucking mess. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's I mean, but then it's like the thing, it's like your whole life. It's a whole life. Like however many years that is, that's all in there. And each little moment is something that would take hours or days or years to unpack.
Right.
And so it's hard to just like go through all of it and like try and dig it up and like reprocess it and understand what it is, what it actually meant, so that you can set it straight in your brain and be like, this is a thing that happened to me. And like, I am not defined by it. And it's like, wow, or am I defined by it? Like all this crap. And like, it comes up or it doesn't come up.
It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. And it takes like so much time. I started therapy before I acknowledged that the church was a cult. I was out. And I left not because I was like, oh, it's a cult and they're treating me bad. I left just because my beliefs left. And I was like, these people are just idiots, like that they think these things. Like I'm not there for it. I don't show up for it. And I moved on. I was like, I don't like religion. This place was weird. And like, I still played with the idea of like cult, whatever. It didn't matter. But then like, leaving, I started going into therapy and like processing all my experiences. And there's so much that like then Shalom's letters came out and like then like the cult conversation
starts. Was it similar for you, or it was like the things that you hadn't even thought to address or that they were living inside you? It was like you couldn't even see them until the whole takedown happened. It's
that the drive to ask for help is the thing that got me to go to therapy. Is I needed help. I didn't know what to do. And I just needed somebody to tell me what to do, almost like I just like, or somebody do it for me kind of thing. Just like, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do right now. Everything came crashing down. There was nowhere else for me to go. I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I was in a relationship that I didn't want to be in, that was overwhelming and hurtful. My mom had just died. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And I like, literally, like I told the therapist on the first day, I was like, she's like, so what brought you in here? And like, all this stuff is like, ah! And I was just like, I need to break up with my girlfriend. And she's like, okay, do it. Like, what?
You're like, well, it's a little more complicated than that.
And so, well, she knew that, but I think that's what that like, okay, do it meant, is like, you don't need me to do that. There must be more here.
Yeah.
And so then it was like, it's all of this stuff of like understanding yourself and understanding like, why are you feeling these ways, and like kind of putting stuff in order and like taking all this chaos. And I learned all sorts of things like that ultimately led me to like coming back and doing this work that we're doing here. And this work is therapeutic to me by like saving the younger version of myself, like going back and like talking to that person, because I had like ran off and explored the world, like chasing these like people who were in desperate situations. I wanted to be with them in those desperate situations, immigrants from all over the world that were like crossing oceans and dying in the water and like all this stuff, going to Africa and to South America and all sorts of things. And I wanted to be there. I wanted to be in that chaos. I wanted to like solve their problems. And like my therapist was, it's just like, it's very different. I think I like to, we'll talk about this in a second, but like, what is the difference between therapy and a shepherd? Like why is one safe and one's not? And aside from like board certified, transparency and like education, like what is the difference? And that's a whole.
Well, a therapist has no vested interest in like there's no selfish interest.
There's not supposed to be. That's the idea. Yeah, they're supposed to ideally, and that's what like all the checks and balances in their system is supposed to call out. But like that's like the thing that was the biggest for me is just somebody to like ask me simple questions that I had to answer. I was stuck there for an hour. I had to like answer this question. It's like, why are you doing these projects about people in the Mediterranean? It's like, oh, well, it's important. The world, I can't believe it's injustice. Like, why are you flying? There's injustices around the corner. Like, why are you flying to Europe to do it? And it's like, and I knew deep down it was because I just wanted to be on one of those boats that popped in the Mediterranean and sank. I wanted to be with those people in the most terrible moment of their life because I wanted to be in that situation. And I was like, why did I want to do that?
Yeah, why did you want to be in that situation?
And then slowly like working that through until like right around as I was working this out, I was like going to Skid Row instead, because I was like, oh, that's here. That's my people in LA. That's my people. I would like spend time on Skid Row, and I'd be like, why do I just want to hang out here on Skid Row, like talking? I'd sit down for hours with people.
You would also hand out food.
I would do volunteer stuff, but then I would also just go in the middle of the day and I'd sit down with a camera and I'd just let somebody talk at me about their, like how they ended up on Skid Row. And like right around that same time is when like Shalom released her letters, and I was like, Dadoy. Like, there it is. That's home. That's the closest thing. And that's the solving, myself.
Say more about that. Like, what is it about that you identified with being with those people?
Well, it's traumatic. It's trauma.
Yeah.
It's the trauma of like the thing that I mean, there's a lot of different pieces to it, but like, like people on Skid Row are the outcasts. They're belittled and they're overlooked and they're ignored. The same thing with immigrants and people that are dying in the Mediterranean. We were just talking about the recent thing of like the billionaires who imploded down by the Titanic that same day that they imploded and died, and the whole world was watching the billionaires. There were 5 of them that died in the Atlantic. There were 100 migrants drowning in the Mediterranean, and no one cared.
Yeah.
And like, it's that, like us in the cult, the only people that mattered were the top, and the rest of us were expendable.
Oh, yeah.
And I felt that way just on many levels. And so I was desperate to point a spotlight on the kid that was ignored.
Yes.
And that's us. Yeah. That's migrants. That's homeless people. That's like everybody that's rejected by society and or belittled by those in power.
That word that you said, I mean, that is a word that I've used a lot. You said
that's right. That's
Milo
the word.
Agrees. But anyway, the word that comes to my mind, that always comes to my mind, is the feeling, like you're saying, of being disposable. Mm-hmm. That is how I always felt in the cult, and obviously you did too. Where it was like, you leave, no one gives a fuck about you. Yeah. You don't do what we want, we don't give a fuck about you. And I have like we both do, we've talked about this, like deep abandonment wounds because of that feeling of like, I'm not being loved for who I am. Mm-hmm. I'm being loved for what I do.
Yeah, what I provide for somebody else.
Yeah. Disposable. Mm-hmm. So that makes a lot of sense, like why you would identify with those people who are treated the same way.
And I think there's just a lot of, like, for me, it was healing myself. And the same thing with this is like being able to highlight and point and give a platform to people who didn't have a voice. I mean, I think the like poetic way to like look at a lot of this is the microphones are pointed at our mouths right now, and we bring people on and point the microphone at their mouths. My job in the cult was to point the microphone at Gary's mouth or to the leader's mouth, to whoever it was recording and preserving their perfect idea of the world that I didn't even understand what they were saying most of the time. And now I revisit the stuff that they're saying. I'm like, these guys are assholes and idiots.
And none of it makes sense.
And really, none of it makes sense. And like, you try and like figure out like what they were trying to do with all of it. And it's like turning the microphone around and saying like, now you get a chance.
Yes.
To
all
talk.
of us who didn't have a voice.
Yeah.
Those nightmares I used to have, I've always had these nightmares about like not being able to talk and screaming and nothing would come out or no one could hear me. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Duh. It's like, we didn't have a voice. Mm-hmm. And that's why, like what you're saying, this is a really healing process, is like being able to, one, take our power back by using our voices and telling our stories, and then giving that opportunity to others who that was taken away from.
Mm-hmm. Just being able to say stuff out loud. Mm-hmm. It gets it out of your brain, and because it's all bouncing around in there. I know for me, it just bounces around, and you're just like, if you never talk about it, it clogs you up, and you just have no words. You can't say anything. But if you just start saying the basic stuff, one of the big things that, not to dive into all my therapy sessions and open the notes that, but like one of the things that was like hard for me early on is, that cliche question, which I never felt that my therapist was cliche, but like the cliche question of, well, how does that make you feel? Mm-hmm. was an impossible question for me to answer. Like, it was like, okay, well, let's start with the basics. Good, bad, very bad, okay.
Isn't
and
that
like a lot of
interesting?
my responses were, okay. You know, like it was so hard to put words to feelings. And
to even identify how
Yeah.
you felt. That's something that I was really like, I don't know how I feel.
right.
Weird.
Am I allowed to feel?
Exactly.
Am I allowed to say it too?
That
Yeah.
seems dangerous.
I got to go check with my designated relationship on this one.
Am I allowed to feel?
Yeah. And let's just, before we move on, because the last thing I think we need to get into is like, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
Like, what about, like, yes, unpacking the past, but like, what is it like? Do you have to do this forever?
God,
Is
I
it
hope
ever
not.
going to stop? Like, are we ever just going to be like, we're good, thank you, you know?
Probably not, but I think that we get close.
Yeah. I just want to answer a little bit of that question I raised at the very beginning of this. And I don't know if I have the answer, but like, maybe we can talk about it for a second. Like, and maybe it's obvious too. Designated relationships and the Elijah, Elisha, the shepherding thing, all that whole thing was a system that the church set up to, you know, we were supposed to submit and get instructions from these people, designated relationships, on how we were supposed to think about things, what we were supposed to do with our time and our day, and blah, blah, blah. And we were also supposed to open up about our feelings with them and talk to them. And like, it was mostly phrased in the sense of like, how do you feel about the word? Because really, word was life, and that's it. You weren't supposed to have feelings about yourself. You're supposed to have everything, you know, it was all supposed to be about the church and the word and stuff. And so like, when I say I trigger myself a little bit when I talk about like, oh, well, my therapist says, it sounds a lot like I'm saying, well, my cult leader says, you know, and like, it's like my designated relationship. It's like this, what is the difference? And do you feel like you can see the difference? Like if you were to have a relationship with a therapist versus...
Well, at this point in my life, I'm always innately skeptical of anybody who's in a position of like power or authority or someone who could mold the way that I think. I have just that innate thing in me. Like I always reserve the right to question what you tell me. Because I don't want to give that power away to anyone ever again. Not even, you know, a licensed mental health professional.
Yeah.
But I think ideally someone that's in that line of work is in it because they actually care to help people. They are qualified. Like these shepherds that were put in charge of people's lives, they had no training whatsoever. Right. None.
Yeah.
Not even pastoral training. Most
mandatory
of them.
Reporting. Hello. Yeah. That's a really simple starting point, I think, is like, just look like, what are the qualifications? Like how the way that I always say it, and I can apply this to a lot of different things, is unearned authority. So you're placed in a position of authority without having done any work.
Yeah.
You know, and I think some of these people that were shepherds would argue, oh, I put in my time. I went, Gary sent me to Timbuktu to shepherd, and I was a elder at this church for a minute, and I studied the Bible, you know, and like, maybe studying the Bible and like that kind of stuff fits in there, but there typically needs to be like a qualification you have to pass, like something real and objective.
No, and in our organization, it was just like, well, if Marilyn says you have the anointing, then you have the anointing. And guess when she decides you have the anointing is if you're in full obedience to her.
Yes, right,
That's
exactly.
the only requirement.
And so when I say unearned authority, like I mean like you didn't do anything hard. You didn't do something that proves that you earned the trust of the people
or
below
that you're
you.
qualified to care for people.
Anytime you're assigned authority from above and the people below, like democracy ideally is an earned authority because you're a person that goes out there and like you convince the population to vote for you. Ideally, I understand. But that's like a bottom up situation, or some sort of like approval thing that's like testable and like you can check it. And like shepherds, especially in our church, not that at all. Like none of that. It was just like Marilyn pick and chose who was loyal to her kind of thing. Whereas like a licensed therapy, that's what like a therapist, that's what the licensing part is. There's boards and like, obviously there's problems with this kind of thing, but like there's a lot of checks and balances and if they misbehave, a board can
hold them accountable,
and take it away and never practice again. And that's like one starting point.
Yeah, because there was no accountability in the Living Word Fellowship with leadership.
Yeah.
And I think with a therapist, there's not likely to be the level of like manipulation where anything that a shepherd said to you had like this twinge of manipulation, because they were upholding the beliefs, the
rules
mission
and the mission
of the church. It was like, you don't matter. Like your well-being doesn't really matter. The mission matters. Right. So anything they said is like coming from that place. Whereas with a therapist is coming from like, again, ideally a place genuinely wanting to help you to heal.
Yeah. It's the therapist is supposed to be, I don't matter, you matter.
Right.
And whereas our designated relationships, sometimes the designated relationships wouldn't say I matter, but they would say Marilyn matters. And you don't.
And the whole thing of, let me tell you how to think. That's what the shepherds are always, let me tell you how to think. Whereas a therapist is going to be like, I'm not going to tell you.
How are you thinking?
They'll
ask the question. It's like that question is like, how do you feel about that? It's like, how do you feel? And it's like, maybe part of the reason I wasn't able to answer that is because like, no one ever asked me how I felt.
So true though. No one gave a shit.
Yeah.
Your feelings don't matter.
Right.
What?
So I think a lot of us have this like inherent mistrust. I have a deep mistrust for anybody in authority. And I love my mistrust for authority. I have no problem like holding that. I think it's
healthy. Yeah. I mean, it's not coming from a place of cynicism. I mean, maybe a little, and that's fine. Like mine is a little bit, but it's protective.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you've been abused in this way, I think that's completely acceptable to have a higher level of skepticism.
Yes, exactly. So then where do we go from here? What do? You know you're out, you know you're messed up, and you got to get fixed. I mean, I could go down a whole other road where I've told you I've gone like too far in that like you're messed up thing.
In what way?
Well, like for a period, like I found myself in a place where
just giving into the dysfunction.
Like I told you, I was like diagnosed with these things by like some people that were not in a position to diagnose me. And like, it's just this condemnation of like, I don't want to get into the details, but like, there's like this position of like, you're bad, you're this, and it's like, you're like, I got to get better. I got to get better. I got to fix the thing inside of me. I'm broken. I'm like, all this stuff is wrong with me, all this wrong. And I like hit that point where like, when I was somebody who was not in a position to diagnose me, sat me down and like said,
this is what's wrong with you.
This is wrong. Like first they were like, first off, you're this personality disorder. You need to stop seeing your therapist. You need a new therapist and you need to get on these drugs. And
this is someone who's not licensed.
They were working on their license, but they were not licensed yet. And they were just not in the type of relationship where they could say that to me. Yeah. And I just laughed in their face because I had like, hit this point, I was like, no more. And it was like, I have this view on like, okay, don't try and fix yourself. Like at a certain point, you're okay who you are. And yes, we always want to like work and get better and try and, be honest about our faults and stuff. But like your faults also make you.
Yeah.
And this place, it is kind of true. Like it made you. And you don't have to get rid of something that you learned from the cult if you don't want to. If that's a part of you, it's a part of you. And maybe that word that John spoke over you is true. Just lose the John part because you get to decide, who you are.
Yeah.
And what other people have said about you get to decide if that's true or not.
Yeah. I like what you're saying too about the just how I took it was like, just try to love yourself. Like, just start there. Don't focus on how fucked up you are. And like, oh my God, I do that too. I'm so hard on myself. And I'm like, I just got to go balls to the wall. Like, I'm going to get healed. I'm going to do that. And then I'll hit a wall where I'm like, fuck it all. Fuck it. I can't do it.
Yes.
I'm just super messed up and I always will be. And then I let myself feel sorry for myself for a little bit. I still struggle very much with like depression and anxiety, and that's something that I might always have to deal with. It definitely gets better and better.
Mhm.
But every time I hit that wall and go back down to that dark place again, I'm like, God, fuck, I'm still here. And I get really discouraged. But then I look back on like where I was even just a year ago. It's hard to see your growth when it's just like the little steps day to day. But if you look back objectively, if you can, and think, wow, like actually I have made quite a bit of progress. Maybe it's not as fast as I want it to be, but it takes the time that it takes.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think it's going too aggro with it, which I am prone to do because I just want to be through it.
Mhm.
And I'm very like proactive. I'm like, I can do this. But what I'm realizing is I'm not holding enough space for myself to just go through the process.
Yeah.
It's very uncomfortable for one thing to feel all those things and address all those things. And so you have to take it in little chunks. That's,
Yeah.
I think, where I go wrong, so to speak, is when I take it in too big of chunks and then I get overwhelmed.
Mhm.
So what are some things like that have helped you or continue to help you like on your journey, like when you're working through this stuff?
A big one that I've found recently is making like selfish space for myself, especially coming back into this and like making a whole room dedicated to the living word, you know, like, and like working on all this stuff is like I've told you, like surfing is a thing for me that is like, it's so selfish in my mind because it's just me and I get to go out in the water. I don't have any, like, there's no cell phone with me to like work, email, like none of that stuff comes in. It's not for my dog. I don't like take him for a walk. It's me, very much so me. And I'm very in the moment in that thing. And it's like, it's not productive. I'm not like getting something done. I have all these things I need to get done. Like, nope, you're just like out there. And it's that like healing thing of just doing something physical.
Being in the water,
yeah. Which water to me is just like such a happy, good thing. And so it's finding that for me, it's like, that's like probably the best thing I do for myself, like on top of like all of the other things, is just being able to take that time to get in the water and like,
it's huge,
and surf and like be focused on that and only that during that hour or two. Yeah.
Taking time, like it's selfish has such a negative connotation. A therapist that I had before was like, people always like, think that that's a negative thing because she's a healthy amount of selfishness is good. Like you have to, especially when you come from a place that's like all about self-sacrifice. And so you just lose yourself completely and you feel like I can't be selfish. That's like, I'm an enemy of the cross if I'm selfish.
That's right.
But it's good. No, you have to take care of yourself if you're going to be able to take care of anybody else. You have to like fill your own cup.
Yeah, that's right. What about you? Where are you going? I mean, like, I know we've talked a lot about, you know, your journey and like how, you know, like we all look at like our lives and like, how do we get to this like certain point? And you're at this precipice in your life that even though you're long past leaving the cult, how do you find that you're going to be selfish or take care of yourself? What's your plan? Is this, I know you may not have an answer for it and that's okay too.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of little things that I do and I've learned. So I did in 2019, like I said, I had just kind of a breakdown where all of the trauma, I think once the church was no longer in existence, like really, I finally knew that it was finally safe to address these things on some level. And so then like the floodgates opened. I ended up going to like a 5-week trauma recovery program.
Yeah, tell us about the Meadows.
Well, it's a trauma-centered recovery place. So it's a lot.
Tell us about your experience in the Meadows.
Okay, well, just to paint a picture, though, there's people from like going there for addiction. There's people like me who are going for like severe depression and like PTSD, suicidal ideation. Like you just have this mix of people, but the whole thing is about their belief at this place is that everything, the underlying issue is trauma. So they try to come from that place. my experience was, I mean, that was one of the darkest times in my life because, like I said, just this nuclear wasteland of shit was finally coming to the surface and I was overwhelmed.
Really paints a picture.
Nuclear wasteland of shit.
Yeah.
I keep saying it too. It's like, really want to drive that point home that it was just fucking awful. That was such a beautiful experience, though, because I was in, for the first time since leaving the cult, I was in a group with a group of people. You're stuck on this like property together. You're living together. You're eating together. It's basically like Shiloh camp. Not that, you know what I mean? It's like the atmosphere was like, everyone's just kind of at rock bottom, right? And no one is trying to prove anything to anyone. You're just like, yeah, we're all just here being fucked up. There was such a level of acceptance there and grace and like, oh my God, these people are nice to me. And these people like me and think that I'm a good, cool person. I'm like, what? And then just the experience of like being in group therapy, like telling my stories where I think I mentioned this in another episode where I would tell my stories of things that happened to me in the cult, thinking like, oh, this is not probably as bad as you all have been through. And people would be like, whoa, you know?
Yeah.
So it did help me to feel like, oh, I do have I do have a reason to feel the way that I feel.
Yeah.
Like this stuff really was bad. Because
Yeah.
we were so gaslit all the time that it wasn't. You're just fucked up, Charity. Like, why are you so depressed?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a little bit of that, like you kind of, I hear this actually a lot from people that are out and whatever. There's a little bit of that, should I say the quote? Like, I didn't get goosed kind of thing, you know, where it's like
that wasn't my experience.
That wasn't my experience. And like, but then in the same breath, the same person might say something that's like really fucked up that happened.
That they didn't realize
was it. Yeah. And it's like, you just have to put yourself in a place. It kind of goes back to that same thing when you're still in the cult and you say something that happened to you to somebody who was not in a cult and like recognizes how bad it is. They just say like the obvious thing, like that's stupid and bad that person says that to you.
Yeah.
And when you're in a place like the Meadows that you went to and you're surrounded by people who went through a bunch of terrible stuff and you mention it and they go, that's really fucked up. You know, you realize like, yeah, maybe it is actually like, thank you for allowing me to say how I really feel about this thing. And like, you know, you want to share it because you know that it impacted you in some way, but you a lot of times don't let yourself say it to yourself, how
Very
bad
true.
it was.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to have somebody to bounce it off of and reflect it back to you. Yeah.
Because there was a part of me that's just like, oh, I'm just so weak that I couldn't, because I was always being told, oh, you're too insecure in the cult. You're so insecure. I'm like, why do you think that is?
Yeah.
So then I think I internalized that as like, oh, I'm just weak. And that's why this stuff affects me so much. It's like, no, I'm actually just a really sensitive person. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. It is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually like a strength. You know, but you sometimes maybe were made to feel that like you shouldn't be so sensitive. And it's hard to be sensitive without being sensitive to yourself and respecting your own feelings.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to like shut that stuff off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm good at that.
Working on it.
Working on it.
I took though from that place that some of the things that I learned, like just even meditation and tapping, like emotional freedom technique tapping, and like I think different things work for different people. But for me, it's like I have to be out in nature. I got to go on walks. I got to move my body. I got to do yoga. The meditation one really helps me because it just quiets my racing mind because I do have like very addictive thinking, like ruminating thoughts. It's very like I struggle with the anxious thoughts. And what else do I do? I mean, the talk therapy helps a lot.
I think, you know, the conversation we were having earlier about like tapping and like even meditation and that kind of stuff for me is like too woo-woo. That's like a little gooey sounding. I don't like that. It like almost reminds me too much of like the cult. But going back to like that question of like everybody's left here and you ask like, what do you believe now? And everybody's in a bunch of different places because we all need something that is like a tonic that we can taste, like that we can swallow. And our different paths, like the choices we make to heal, are healing in themselves. Like for me, rejecting anything that isn't verifiable with pieces of paper and scientists is like a healing thing for myself.
Yeah.
It's why I think in part I'm so insistent on like, let's go back to what John Robert Stevens said and play back the tape. Let's do a bunch of research on the thing and the time and the like. It's why I'm actually diving into this in part in the way that I am. And like,
it is almost a scientific approach.
It's like a scientific approach to it because I need to find stable ground. And I feel like in the cult, there was no stable ground. And like, it was just like, well, I feel this way about something, you know?
And it would change all the time, all the contradiction.
Exactly.
It's like you couldn't keep up with wait, now I'm not supposed to believe that. I'm supposed to believe this.
Exactly. Like let's find like where reality is. I need reality. And I think we all find our own different, like that's not like I'm not saying you don't need reality, but you know, no, you need your things that are like tapping into that part of you that's a truth that you were denied of, like your spiritual side and your, I don't know what you would call it, but like this like higher self that you want, that is like, that's your way of healing, is like through that process. And like maybe too many notepads and lab coats would scare you, you know? And so we all have to find our own thing, because at the end of the day, it is about our own personal healing.
Yeah. And I've learned I used to be kind of pushy about the things that I thought worked and be like, oh, well, you should do this. Like telling people, you should try it. And it was all with good intentions. Like I want to help. But what I learned is like, that's not helpful. Like people have to, I can say what works for me. And if you feel like trying it, try it. If not, no big deal. Like you do what works for you, which I think is so like, that is a much healthier approach. I did also learn at the Meadows about codependency, and like I was definitely codependent. And one of the traits of codependence is they feel like they should tell everyone like how to do things and how to feel. I mean, that was the cult too. I mean, God, like, and it is really helpful just to look at those things and kind of start to, I don't know, walk that back. And
that's what I'd say, if we can leave it here with like a call to action kind of thing. I know a lot of people that are probably already watching this don't freaking need anybody to tell them like to go get healed, find your healing stuff. And that's not, you know, I would never want to tell anybody what they should do for their own life and their own choices and stuff. But I think I would want to say it is safe and it's okay. It's scary. It is scary at first to confront that stuff inside of you and acknowledge, you know, like just take it a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's a real thing, but it goes back to that like very beginning stuff we were saying. It's like, it feels so good to me, having done this a bunch, to destroy a past version of myself and the beliefs that I held on to that were like a piece of driftwood you're out at sea. Like you can hold on to that, but you're just going to drift around in circles out there. You could let go of it and start swimming. And then you'll get somewhere. And it might be scary to let go of it, but like do it, because you gotta get somewhere. You gotta get out of that freaking, you're going to drown, you know?
And healing is possible. I really believe that. I mean, science, Scott, your favorite, says neuroplasticity, you know?
I know that was one that I was resistant to because it just sounds so woo-woo, but
science, baby.
There's a lot of science behind it, apparently.
You can rewire those, change those neural pathways. Rewire your brain. Have to believe it. I choose to keep trying. I mean, even there's times where I'm like, fuck it, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't. But I think it's just the thing that keeps me going. It's like, I don't want them to have stolen my life from me.
We were brainwashed.
Yeah.
Let's get our brains dirty. It's I think I like to also say like we all live in our own like delusion because we like see the world our own ways. And I accept that like my way might seem diluted to other people.
But it's your way.
But it's my way, and I think that's probably the most important.
It is.
Yeah.
You know you the best.
Right. Cool.
Cool.
Toodaloo.
Toodaloo. Every time I gotta say something real stupid at the end.
Gotta end it somehow.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Do you want to do a like and subscribe?
Please like and subscribe. You can follow us on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube,
Instagram, TikTok. Kinda. There are links in the show notes to everything. Please, as always, send us emails, thoughts, rate, review, subscribe, share this stuff to your friends who have ever been curious about any of this stuff and shove it down their throat. Because it's like they want to know. It's just hard to hit play sometimes on these culty people.
That's right.
Anyways.
And don't forget, we have an email linked in the show notes if you want to send us your stories or anything that you want to shout at us.
Yes.
Be nice. We're traumatized.
You can be a little mean. That's fine. We'll take it.
Scott will read those ones.
Yeah. If you're really mean, we'll read it out loud.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I like that.